Recording, and I want to welcome everybody to the SIG API Machinery meeting. Today is September 22nd of 2021. The fall has started in the northern hemisphere. The spring is starting in the southern one, so changes of seasons. Okay, I will stop with that. And why don't we start with our first topic for today? Mo, do you want to take it?
Yeah, if you want, could you open the link? So this issue was brought up in a SIG auth meeting a while back. And the consensus in that meeting had been that for now, all we want to do is fix the bug. The bug being, if I understood correctly, whenever we did the wiring of the CRD extensions API server, there was a small oversight, and it does not take into account the encryption at rest config. So if you ask to encrypt some custom resources at rest, we will just happily ignore that config option and it will not be encrypted at rest. So if I recall correctly, I think, David, I think you were on the call, or asked us to just let's go ahead and fix the bug, and we can, if in some future state we desire some kind of hint on the CRD that dynamically tells the API server that this custom resource is asking for some kind of protection at rest. That is kept for some future date, if someone cares. But for now, we just wanted to make it so that if you statically define this, that we would not just ignore it. And I believe that in SIG API Machinery triage meeting, someone was like, please write a cap. And so Andrew, who's not on the call today, wanted to ask, can we just fix the bug without writing a cap?
My opinion is that this is a bug and you can fix it without writing a cap.
Mine as well. But anything that says I want to add a field to the CRD to make it configurable, I think that requires a cap. And reconciliation with this. Once we allow this and once we fix this bug, you have to, that future cap has to take into account which one wins.
Yeah, totally. All makes sense. Daniel,
help me make sure. I thought I heard you say, I'm not familiar with this. I thought I heard you say there already is a field saying whether to encrypt at rest.
No, long ago in a SIG auth meeting, probably over a year and some ago, when this had come up originally, before even the bug was filed, there had been some vague discussion around how do you let something that is dynamically created at runtime sort of ask for some kind of static config or something. I don't know. You could imagine something super high level like I'm sensitive or I'm private, and this API server do whatever makes sense for sensitive and private things. But yeah, so Daniel or David or anyone from here.
Yeah, I think it's fine to fix the bug. I think it's fine to fix the bug. I mean, I personally wouldn't use this or recommend that somebody uses it, but like if you need your CRD corrupted, encrypted, I don't know.
Sorry, can you just tell me then, if it's not controlled by a field, what's it controlled by?
There's a static config file on disk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a little awkward, and conceptually it doesn't sort of line up right, because you're asking to encrypt a API resource that may exist at some undefined future point. Don't typo anything. You're gonna be sad if you typo.
And if it's multiple API servers, you have to have consistent files on all their disks.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure you're highly hosed if your API servers are out of sync in their config. Like nothing.
Oh man.
Yeah,
wow.
If you fix this bug, you do need to decide what happens if I turn this on after the resource has already been created.
I think it'll be the same as we handle it for other APIs where this can be turned on after the fact, right? And you do that by saying, you can read it
as long as it doesn't corrupt your etcd. That's all I care.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't expect it to. I will say that this PR is going to need an integration test, Mo.
Oh yeah, no. Andrew's not done or anything.
Okay.
It's more of the he wanted to ask, can I just do the work instead of write a KEP about doing the work?
Yeah. No, I imagine it was just a quick skim during triage.
To Mike's question, there are ways to roll this out. So you can give it a chain of things and say, like, here's how you can read, but when you write, don't encrypt yet. And then so you would roll that out so all your servers know how to read encrypted data. And then you would roll out the config that says, now start writing encrypted data.
Yeah, it's a
phase. Possible. It's not trivial.
Right. I guess the trick is simply you need to make the new code able to cope with whatever it reads, regardless of what's in the file, and that will do the main trick.
You've got to have the config so that it knows to get the keys and stuff.
Yeah, it's all sort of config. But okay, yeah. But if Daniel or David, if someone could just comment on the issues / PR saying it's all good.
Oh yeah, sure.
Awesome. But yeah, I think we can move on unless someone else has questions or thoughts.
Sounds good. Your next topic is also about,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't think neither Jordan or David was at the last SIG Auth meeting, so this might be the first time they're hearing of it, so this will be fun. So I brought up this last SIG Auth meeting in regards to KMS. So if folks are not familiar, KMS, Key Management Service or whatever, is one of the ways that we allow you to do encryption at rest. It is by far the most fancy way. It also is by far the most catastrophic to destroy your cluster if you do it the wrong way. And so the gRPC API that underpins this functionality has been in beta for a long time. It has a set of pretty core problems with it. I suspect that if someone proposed this API today, David would do a PR review on it and he would be unhappy with it. Is my suspicion on that one. So we've been looking through the variety of things, we being Anish and Rita and myself, on all the various things that we could try to do to fix all the open issues with it. So that way we could work towards getting it into a V1 API. And one of the thought experiments I had that I wanted to bring up here was, instead of trying to necessarily fix this API, should we basically, there's two like distinct things that are sort of bulleted there. One would be has there been any efforts to support encryption at rest directly in etcd? If it could do that in some good way, could we stop being in the business of application level encryption at rest? Could we let our data store do our encryption for us? That's one. And the other thought was, would it be possible to formalize the actual subset of the etcd API that the Kube API server relies on, somehow codify that and enforce that, and thus allow someone to build an implementation of that subset of the API, with the idea being that you could implement your encryption at rest at that layer if you so desired. The difference is, the goal here is not to just move the complexity around. The idea is, with the KMS approach today, the format that is stored on disk, how the encryption happens, the envelope encryption with data encryption keys per etcd key value pair, all of that are very strong opinions about how encryption at rest works, even when you are using KMS. And a lot of the problems with like how, for example, if you have a large set of secrets that are encrypted, bringing up your API server while it's trying to fill up its caches takes an incredibly long time, because it has to do a ton of calls to the KMS to decrypt the data encryption keys it has and then decrypt the data. I feel like some of those problems would just go away if you just said, do whatever makes sense in your environment. You have complete control instead of like There's like a vague entry point that we gave you with a bunch of opinions that you might not agree with. David, I see you had your hand up for a while, so if you want to.
Yeah, so some of the most unfortunate aspects of this API are the failure modes when individual entries cannot be read. Are you going to try to address those shortcomings in a change? Or are you more narrowly focused on, I think it could be more efficient if I built a proxy around this?
Both. So I think the performance implications are just sort of awful. Right, you can get things really wrong. I also would hope that, if you have that proxy layer and it knows it can't decrypt something, it also knows based on its internal logic that the underlying KMS key that was used to encrypt that data is gone and completely unrecoverable. That data is deleted. That key is gone. Just stop.
That breaks
sure.
all the lifecycle hooks. I have a couple thoughts on the questions you asked before we keep going down this train. As far as I know, etcd doesn't do encryption at rest itself, and nobody has looked into that. So that's one thing. Formalizing the subset of etcd, that is probably not going to happen. However, you can re-implement the etcd server contract. There's multiple people have done that. Like Kine, produced by Rancher originally, does that. So if you want to make a proxy which somehow internally does encryption, you can do that.
Could I ask why we can't formulate, like why can we not write a cap to say these are the APIs that the API server wants to call, and this is what it expects?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I don't understand how that would make your life easier.
So that way, instead of relying on an implementation detail, right? Like Kine relies on the fact that we make a certain set of transaction calls and range requests and lease requests, and it responds basically in a way that kind of pretends to be etcd in a reasonable enough way that it fools us. I would prefer not to rely on an undefined surface area, right? I don't think it's fair to tell someone, hey, hook into this API that we might change at any point, right? Like we might start calling.
Okay, so we're not going to change the API, but I would consider all etcd3 features on the table.
Yeah, I would as well. I wouldn't want to constrain. I wouldn't feel constrained by future, even if I documented it for you, Mo. And I said, I use all of these. I wouldn't feel bad in 124 about using a new one.
So
the only benefit you'd get is that you'd get some warning that we're changing it, and we might forget.
Well, so let me just ask, right? You said there are people that have implemented this, such as Kine. So, I guess where's the responsibility? I think I've asked this before, and I think the Kine people said they track what's happening here, so they take responsibility for reacting. That does lead to kind of an ugly scenario, right? They can only react. I mean, hopefully there's some of them here and they know beforehand, but there's no, I asked, no, there's no like formal relationship. There's nothing that helps them get a heads up ahead of time. They just have to react to things breaking.
Yeah, that's why I couldn't stay with a straight face that SIG should recommend a proxy-based encryption method that relies on an undefined API set, right?
It's not undefined. It is defined.
It's not. It cannot be defined because etcd can add new APIs at any point, and you're saying you're willing to use them at any point. So it is undefined. Right? That's what I mean. I understand there's some APIs that exist today that do a thing. I'm saying that you're saying you will expand it without warning, effectively. Right?
I mean, you're implementing etcd's API interface. Yes, so that is the definition. It is subject to change, but I wouldn't call it undefined.
Okay, we don't need to use the specific, like try to define what it means. But what I'm saying is that it is too, I see you laughing, Jordan. I could not seriously tell someone that, hey, here's this really large surface area of a gRPC API that the etcd folks maintain, and whenever they want to add a new feature, they add a new feature. You just have to keep up with that and make it work. And
I mean, to my knowledge, we've never broken Kine, so it may be kind of academic. It doesn't change that often. However, I kind of agree that this probably isn't a good reason to be re-implementing the etcd storage interface. So I can't argue with you there.
David, I think I answered you earlier.
Yeah, so that goes back to the questions David was asking. Jordan, no, Kind is part of
Kind,
K3S. It's not all of
K-I-N-E.
K3S.
It's K-I-N-E, not kind with a D. It's K-I-N-E
Oh.
with an E.
I misheard. I was very confused.
Yeah, Kind is the SQL implementation of the etcd.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
I believe it stands for Kind is not etcd.
No, of course it does. Yeah.
All right, thanks for the link.
Yeah, so okay, so what I'm hearing is etcd does not have any encryption at rest. Is there any etcd maintainers on the call? Would there be any interest in doing that?
Even if they were interested in doing it, is it a thing we would want to do? One of the capabilities that you get now is that nothing past the API server in the write flow has access to what the clear text is. Now, whether that's a property we want to keep or not is reasonable to discuss. But if you were to add it directly to etcd, that capability would be gone.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, honestly, even running etcd on a VM with full disk encryption doesn't seem to check the box for people. And like, I don't think there's too much difference between etcd doing the encryption or the storage driver doing the encryption.
Right. I mean, I'm going to inject my favorite complaint here, which is that everybody who's talking about encryption and not talking about the keys is kind of missing the point.
I mean, it's sort of the key management system or server is supposed to like let you solve those separately, I guess.
But I mean, my point here is that, holding the key is equivalent to holding the plain text. And until we're clear on who can hold the key, we're not really clear on what we're doing and what protection, what are we protecting against?
I agree.
Yeah, yes, the threat model on this entire API surface is not well defined.
Yeah. To answer your questions from an etcd maintainer perspective, I'm a maintainer. This has come up before, and the previous answer usually was just what Daniel said, which is what's wrong with just having the disk do the encryption.
That's fair. Okay, but if I understand correctly, from at least SIG API Machinery's perspective, you can go build a proxy layer if you want. It does not sound like a sane approach for SIG auth, though, because there would be no, if we wrote a stable feature, it would basically get broken by you guys on accident if you change the thing.
I think you could structure it in a way where you would fail safely if you were to reproduce the surface area, do some notion of pass through for what you recognize, reject things you didn't recognize, and then do your encryption on the way in and way out. And that way, if a new feature got added, you would simply reject that request and you would fail in a safe direction.
If you really wanted to make it work this way, I don't think you should, but if you really wanted to, I believe you should be able to write tests, right, like include some golden data, a mock KMS server, right? You should be able to run integration and or E2E tests that verify that we haven't broken you.
I don't think that's possible. Imagine the pagination approach where pagination comes in. If you read and write your golden data, because we're backwards compatible with what was there before, you would never leverage it. You wouldn't know that it broke when something else attempted to.
I'd have to see more exactly, but you can't guarantee that new features work, but you should be able to guarantee that data that was formerly readable doesn't become unreadable.
That I agree with.
Okay.
I mean, and maybe you could even arrange it in such a way that like you run something and then all the integration tests run, and then you run something else and see if, or like run a copy of the integration tests that all exercise some proxy, and if there's any feature exercise that you don't have an answer for, then it will blow up.
I mean, that seems like a good fit for like running a conformance test suite or the EDE test suite against a cluster configured with the storage backend proxy thing.
It's kind of a rabbit hole though, because I don't think that that's what you really want to sign up for.
Right. I don't like the idea of maintaining something like that either. But if someone was going to, and they wanted to know, like, how will I know if my thing has drifted or a new feature is being expected? Like, that's what I would tell them. Like, run these tests against that configuration at head. And that will give you the best advance notice that a new thing started getting used by the storage layer that your proxy shim doesn't know about or handle correctly.
Separately, I am interested in, so I can imagine how you can get a lot more performance out of something like a proxy. I don't really see how it would do good things for the I lost a decryption key use case. And I do see that as one of the biggest shortcomings of the design we have today.
Yeah, Anish and Rita and I have discussed trying to come up with something. Daniel mentioned this. It's the lifecycle hooks getting ignored, right? That is problematic. You can't just say, I don't know what the data is. You have to come up with something nicer than that. Not sure what that is when you've lost the data. I mean, you have the wrapper of the data.
I'm not super familiar with all the possible implementations, but it does seem like a problem with the system in general is that there's no way to expose which keys are still in use. Right, like you have to like plow through all the etcd data to figure out if any particular kek is used by some particular deck, right? There's no way to expose that, which means that even if your KMS offered some way to protect a key until it's got no more users, like you couldn't take advantage of that. So that, to me, that's the problem. Like it's not that like you can randomly lose a key, right? Like we can't prevent all possible failure modes, but there's like, even if you wanted to not delete keys that were in use, there's no way to make the system do it. So that seems like the problem to me.
Yeah, I mean, your KMS is sent the the data encryption key, so it can, that has to encrypt, right? So it could include a key ID, and then you just, if you had some kind of lazy watching process that maintained all key IDs that were used on a particular cluster, it could have a active list, okay? But if you wanted to garbage collect that list, you would have to do a full iteration, be like, all right, has everything been deleted yet? And now I can mark this one as gone.
Yeah. So like some safe flow, like some safe flow for key rotation, or like some flow for, hey, this key is getting deleted. Maybe you should make sure you're not using it and re-encrypt because it's not going to be available in 6 hours, right? Like I think a solution for either of those would go a long way. My primary complaint though with this is actually performance. Like if you get a lot of say secrets encoded, the list I think is still not parallelized. So if you list things, it is super slow because you have to wait for it to decode every single thing in serial, which is not necessary.
Yeah, it's very slow and painful. It also, this is a general complaint against the whole encryption at rest functionality, is that it's resource based, and I don't know, I just encrypt everything and be done with it. Then I don't have to remember, like the whole CRD thing. None of it matters if everything's encrypted.
Yeah, I mean, That's already done for everything if you have full disk encryption on, which I think many installations do.
Yeah, but apparently, as you mentioned, that's not good enough for whatever reason. It's just not good enough.
Yeah, I think this is a case where engineering and consumers have different opinions of what makes them feel safe.
Yeah. Okay. I can continue this discussion in SIG auth. Actually, I was going to ask Anish, Rita, did you all have any thoughts or comments or questions? More focused of this group. Right now, I'm getting the general sense, don't do this. But here's like some vague ways that you could write tests if you did do this that would guard you, but you have to implement the entire SIG API, which is a little higher bar, but still probably doable.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I mean, I feel like we can probably go back to the proposal that we have today, but we can also explore the kind approach to see if it's something that's feasible.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can go back and discuss this again with SIG auth.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Great. I think we can move to the next one, which is liens. And we have, yes.
Yeah, looks like the author is here. David, I saw you left a comment there. So the open question was, is it good enough just to give people a permission so that they can override it, or is there more required? So it sounded like David thought there was a little bit more required, but I'll let you.
Yeah, so it looks like this proposal has changed liens from being a hard block to being advisory, and that there would still be the ability to pass a delete option that says delete this even if there are active liens. I think that leaves a few questions around how widely used that would likely be. I imagine there'd be a kube control delete option. I would expect something like a namespace controller to force the delete, since it is a privileged controller. I'm not clear on whether that would actually produce the behavior that's desired by the KEP originally. I'm also not clear on whether that permission would be broadly granted. Would it be granted to namespace editors, for instance? And then I still think the notion of a sub-resource comes up because it's not clear to me whether liens would be set on spec or status or neither. I think the ability to say this shouldn't be deleted or this is okay to be deleted now is logically distinct from the ability to say that what the desire of the resource is and what the status of the resource is.
I think it might be helpful to enumerate the use cases. Like the primary use case that I have in mind, and this is not the one that KEP was started with, but the primary use case I have in mind is I'm a user, I made something important. I want, if I go through and like run a Terraform command or something, I don't want it to get deleted. I want to have to uncheck another box to delete it. If the namespace is going away, okay, well, whatever. But if I'm running a command and accidentally deleting this thing, I want it to not work until I tell it, okay, yeah, actually, that's okay. So I guess that would argue for not giving, definitely not force deleting without people asking specifically to do that.
Yeah, my use case comes from secret protection, and it is to protect from the secret while it is being used by volume snapshot or persistent volume. And for that case, it is a kind of advisory, and someone may need to delete even if it is used. So yeah, I agree that we can discuss whether there are any requirement or use case.
Yeah, I think for both of those use cases, it would be fine for these to be set with spec.
So, this design talks about a controller that is trying to wire up leans. Actually, I guess let's step back one step. Would you be happy if the power to delete just always granted the power to ignore the leans? Not that it always did.
For me, as long as you
always granted the power.
Yeah, as long as you have to like go out of your way to set a specific option, yeah, that would be fine with me.
And I don't know McCorma's name. Is that fine with you as well? I pronounced it so badly he doesn't know I've asked him. Daniel, do you know how to pronounce his name?
No, Masaki.
Oh, yeah, Masaki, yeah. Oh,
would it be okay with you if the ability to delete also granted the ability to force a deletion if you specifically requested it?
Yeah, I think it's okay to delete.
Okay.
Okay, and then, well, I'll let Mo have a chance since he just raised his hand.
I was just going to ask a question. Would an admission controller be able to prevent a forced delete? I assume so, right?
I don't actually know. I think it sees the delete options, doesn't it? I have to look up the.
I think it does see them.
Right. So if you had a resource that you wanted to protect more betters than just delete permissions on the forced delete, you could enforce it, right? If you wanted.
If you could, but admission plugin, you don't need this.
You could, but don't do it. Just don't do it. It's going to make your life hard. Your users are going to be very confused.
Actually, as for the implementation, I've added the code before the administer webhook, so it will avoid plugin to force delete. Yeah, but it depends on the implementation.
Okay, so I think we should, I don't know, publicize this a little bit to make sure that the two use cases that we've mentioned are actually going to satisfy everybody. Like, especially, I think Tim has left a lot of comments on this, so he may have opinions. Maybe somebody has a valid use case for a referential integrity lock, which I'm not really interested in making, but we should make sure that nobody wants that before we make something that isn't that. Sorry, Jordan, go ahead.
I was just wincing at the thought of a referential integrity lock.
That's what everybody wants.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one.
So then how these things get set. So thinking about who is going to set this and whether it should be spec, status, or something different. I remember with finalizers, because it's a set of distributed controllers, they really wanted a way to be able to modify a finalizer without actually even having rights to mutate the spec. That was just a level of accident you didn't need to have in your life when I had it. The leans seem like they would fall into a similar category, where it's something that's global metadata, and if I write a controller that is managing my leans, I want it to be basically impossible for me to use an outdated version of an API, issue a replace, and blow away a spec field. that was a really, really bad outcome.
I mean, with server-side apply, you should be able to have a class of requests that's drastically safer. So I don't know if you think it's sufficiently easy to do the right thing now that we don't need to worry about it, or if you think that no, that gives too much like permission escalation, in which case it does seem like a sub-resource would be a good idea.
I do worry about it on something like secrets. You know, what's stitching your thing together? Would I choose to block on it? I don't. It's right on the edge. Like I do regret finalizers quite a bit.
Well, it seems like the more pertinent question is, do we want to prevent people who have the ability to write a spec from changing leans? Because we can always later add a sub-resource that only lets you change leans, but it's hard to take away the ability to people who can write spec to write the leans.
Okay. In the manner in which this KEP describes it, it doesn't seem like when the resource is created, you're likely to know what leans to place on it, right? If you look at the list of use cases, it's often an inversion where you created a secret, you got a pod created, and now you need to establish a lean. And if that's the case and you don't commonly set it on create, why would we want it settable via spec at all?
My other use case may not be covered, which is like, I know I'm making something important and I want to set the please don't delete this bit on it when I create it. Like, I don't know, maybe it's a namespace or a particular secret or a role. I'm not sure. But I know I don't want it accidentally deleted.
And so your use case there is not the one that's controller driven as described in the KEP.
Right. This would be human driven. Right, it's something I put in my Kubernetes YAML file just in case I forget to put the thing in Terraform that tells it not to delete and recreate.
I may have glossed over that in the KEP. If it's not there, it'll be worth writing down.
Yeah, it may not be there. I haven't looked at the KEP in a little while. So.
All right.
We don't have to decide right now. I think this has been a good discussion, and maybe people would benefit from stewing on it a little bit longer.
Yeah, but that does, knowing that we want to make it such that every user with the power to delete has the power to override the leans is something very valuable to put in the KEP. And I think I'd also want to see an explicit indication of, I guess the KEP does explicitly say now the namespace controller would not ignore the lien. I think that it probably should ignore the lien, and that the garbage collection controller should honor the lien.
Yeah, that sounds, the namespace lifecycle controller should honor the liens on namespaces. Well, it doesn't delete namespaces, so that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it should ignore liens on objects within a namespace.
And then, yeah, adding your use case and then trying to figure out if that satisfies Tim. And then, yeah, I'll rethink on spec versus not spec in light of I have a user who wants to mark it when he first creates it.
Okay, so maybe I should make another pass. Masaki can make the changes that you just mentioned. And I think I can dig up a few threads on, I think, SIG CLI, maybe SIG Arch, where people have wanted deletion protection, and send them over to this CAP and say, hey, we're thinking about approving this pretty soon, so maybe you want to make sure that this is going to satisfy yourself. How does that sound for next steps?
Okay.
That works for me.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. Jordan, you're next.
All right. I promised I would be quick. There was a pull request opened to update the version of JSON-iterator and the underlying reflect library in order to make them compatible with Go 1.18. And that opened a can of worms and made me very scared. Basically, our JSON decoder, we switched away from some of the, well, anyway, we switched to use JSON-iterator several years ago for performance reasons. And it achieves some of those performance improvements by using a forked reflect library that is not stable across Go versions, and by not being fully correct in how it checks for like UTF-8 valid data when it is decoding. That is terrifying to me. In the meantime, the performance of the standard library JSON decoder has actually improved, and the performance of JSON-iterator has regressed. And so we are now in a situation where we are using a JSON library that has significantly worse allocation performance. It still has better CPU performance, but at the cost of correctness. And it has known incompatibilities across Go versions. And so I was investigating what it would take to switch back to the standard library decoder, which I am far more confident in the correctness of, without losing the case sensitivity and number preserving properties that we currently have from the JSON-iterator implementation. So that's what this pull request is a proof of concept of. I think I had it at the point where like all the tests were passing and everything looked good. I had some benchmarks there. I would like to move forward with this just to get us to the point where new versions of Go won't break us and we aren't using like memory unsafe, incorrect JSON decoders. I would like to do this in a way that is as contained as possible. I'm not particularly interested in like maintaining so the way this does it is by starting with the standard library implementation, forking it internally, and then layering on like one patch that adds case sensitivity and strict checking. I would like to structure it in a way that we could upstream those and then stop carrying this and not expose additional API surface until we reach that point. So the main discussion on here was around whether this should live inside a staging repo or whether it should live inside a SIG's JSON repo. There are actually consumers like SIG's YAML that would benefit from this, which are currently using the standard library and don't have the ability to do case sensitivity or duplicate field checking. I originally put this on the agenda as a sub item of Lucas's topic, which was broader in scope and sort of a holistic, how can we make our JSON and YAML libraries better? I think that's a good conversation to have, but I would like to fix the issue we currently have ahead of sort of a holistic, how do we want to provide a full-featured JSON library to consumers? I see my PR more as a, we are in a bad spot now, and I would like to make us safer first, stabilize us first, and then consider what we want to expose long-term.
Yeah, I'm in favor of this.
Are you planning to try personally to take the patch into Golang or no?
So it turns out the Go team is already working on a v2 JSON experiment. And case sensitivity and duplicate field checking are on their list of features to support. Yep, that's it. That's the what they're working on. Some of this was not gated on, but intending to build on top of some of the generics capability that is coming in Go 1.18, especially around adding custom marshallers for types and things like that. So I will be watching this, and I will certainly make noise in the Go issues saying, we had to do this in order to have a case-sensitive duplicate checking yet memory-safe implementation. We would love to stop doing this and collapse back onto the standard library. Please let us do that. That's what I'm planning to do.
Okay. No other concerns from me.
Okay. How do we want to move forward with this? Is this KEP worthy, or is this we would need a SIGs repo and we're exposing two methods? I don't feel that strong either way.
I'd be happy to approve a SIGs repo.
Yeah, I would approve a SIGs repo. I'm going to assume you have tests for the duplicate fields and the thing, because Paranoid, you probably added them back when json-iter came in.
Duplicate fields, no. So the case sensitivity and the number preserving, absolutely. The duplicate fields is only used by the strict decoder, which I think is only used by some of the config loaders today. So there are tests there that exercise it, but I haven't gone and added the test specifically on top of the forks patch yet, but I would.
Okay.
Okay. I will clean up the description of that and sort of make a formal proposal and probably email the list, and we can discuss it and hack it there.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Mike, we finally got to your topic. We have 10 more minutes. We want to get into it.
I'll introduce it. I'm not sure how much we have, what'll happen. So I'm getting interested in supporting edge scenarios. And one of the interesting features about edge scenarios is disconnected operation. There are different ways of using Kubernetes in edge scenarios, but in some of them, there are several projects out there that basically treat an edge location like a node that maybe operate disconnected for a while. And, they kind of want to use Kubernetes, but these different projects, they do things a bit differently on these nodes, because the nodes today are using a bunch of code that is really presumes that, disconnection is a rare exception, not something that should go on normally for a while. And these projects, such as Kube Edge, Super Edge, OpenYurt, are some examples. They have things like replacement kubelets, replacement API. They have things like API server proxies that do some subsets. So, for example, Super Edge and OpenYurt have an API server caching proxy. As far as I can see, they only support reads, not writes. And so they also have some more divergent stuff. And I'm just looking at how to make things go in the least divergent way possible, right? So my thought is, if we had a caching API server proxy that handled writes as well as reads, everything else on these nodes could be more or less normal. They would talk to the local proxy, which would handle API server duties while disconnected, and while connected, it would be passed through. While disconnected, it would handle things, and that involves, of course, resyncing when you flip from the disconnected mode back to the connected mode. I'm imagining something that operates in basically one of two modes. So that's the basic motivation and idea. I think one of the more exciting points of this is, if you really are going to handle writes, what do you do about resource versions? because today there's one authority that counts resource versions up. And now you would have a local authority that, can't hand out the same resource versions as the central authority. So that gets a little exciting. But anyway, I'm going to stop there and just get reactions.
So have you already sketched out how you would reconcile writes?
So I've, in my head, right, my thinking is that, so the basic idea is, now that we have server-side apply, we're tracking who's writing what parts of each object. And in the majority of scenarios, each part of each object has only one writer. So we can use the metadata from server-side apply to, reconcile, to look at things that have fine enough grain that they're not conflicts. Okay. So if they're not conflicts, then reconciling is not tough in that sense. There is still this issue of, what kind of resource versions does this thing hand out? Does the proxy hand out while it's disconnected? But apart from that, using the SSA metadata, the idea, the use case would be, we may attempt to only support scenarios where there are no conflicts when you look at things with the fine-grained structure. So that's the basic idea.
So I guess I'll comment and then let somebody else go if they want. The server-side apply metadata lets you know if there were any conflicts based on your view of the resource the last time you saw it, but it doesn't let you know whether conflicts arose since that point in time. And so it seems like you could take a guess that maybe this isn't going to conflict, but I don't see how you could guarantee that you would not conflict.
Right. I'm imagining something that could detect conflicts at reconcile time and would simply throw some kind of an error. Again, the intent is for scenarios where there aren't conflicts. So, if they do happen, it's a bug, and and it would be a matter of, detecting and reacting to the bug, but it's not something that's intended to be, work in some deeper sense.
My approach would be to just forbid writes if you're disconnected.
Yeah, that doesn't work. I mean, if you look, for example, at how the kubelet works, you have to be able to restart these disconnected nodes because, that restart is normal. And if disconnected is normal, you have to restart while disconnected. Kubelet does writes when it starts up.
Right.
When it recovers things, it does writes.
My backup plan would be to split the resources into parts that are owned by the node and parts that are owned by the rest of the system. And therefore, whatever you write to the local node, it either prevents you from writing it because you don't own that part. For example, you're trying to write spec, but you can only write back to status, or it allows you to write. And then when it reconnects, it clobbers whatever anyone else has written for status. I think there's still problems with that, though.
So I don't want to do something that only supports the kubelet. Right? I mean, that's kind of what these other projects do, is they have kind of special kubelets and special replacements for kubelet. I'm trying to make everything else normal and support general usage. Again, non-conflicting usage. I understand and agree with, we don't have the necessary metadata to, know really proactively, what might be a conflict if during disconnection. So, again, my take is that this is really a matter to shift left. Really, it's intended to only support scenarios where there aren't conflicts. So we only, we will detect them, but not claim to have a wonderful resolution.
About the resource version in this, I don't think that's too difficult. I think the write-through proxy or the write-through cache can use, like, I can imagine lots of ways. Like, even while presenting it as a number, you could multiply the real resource version by, 1 billion and use the lower digits for your own local resource numbers. Alternatively, you could tack on a floating point. Alternatively, you could convert to strings, and like encode a couple different versions in there. So I think that's solvable.
I suspect it's solvable too, but it really raises the questions about, what parts of the code really know that this thing is an integer. And so I've actually started investigating that. I've taken a particular, commit from upstream and started making a change that introduces an abstraction for the parsed resource version. And I'm looking at everything that reads it reads the resource version. And trying to replace it with something that instead of parsing as an int, runs through this abstraction so that I'll find all the places.
Yeah, we've documented that people should not compare it except for equality, but people ignore this. So, and you probably won't find the violations within the Kubernetes code base itself.
Yeah, that's a little bit concerning, but in some sense, I think what I'm saying, again, I'm willing to impose some usage restriction, right? Like I said, first off, there's this restriction of no actual conflicts. I believe that in general, Kubernetes does support conflicts, right? So I think you have, edge is tough, right? Disconnected operation gets tough, and there's other things that make edge more complicated as well. So, I'm willing to say, we're going to solve for an articulated, identified, space of usage. And we can say, I think for that space of usage, it should indeed be that the client code, and by this, I don't mean necessarily our client Go package, but the actual stuff that developers write, right? The application level code, we've always said that they should not parse the string. And I'm willing to say that, yeah, this only works if they don't parse the string, right? And continue, as we say, compare it for equality and no more.
Yeah, I previously tried to encrypt the resource version so that it wouldn't be numerically comparable, and Clayton shot me down.
Yeah,
I still think I would have been right, but yeah, I think we're at time.
Yeah, I'm I think less optimistic than Daniel that I see a solution. If you definitely want rights, it seems like you probably want to describe how you think those rights would work and give us some time to read it before we talk about it again.
And what sort of work are you concerned with here? Avoiding conflicts or making up a resource version, or what?
Yes.
Both. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the especially problematic thing is a reconciliation might modify the past from the perspective of a consumer.
Well, that, in other words, that you're concerned about the resource version stuff.
I think we need to handle both, but I just wanted to close with that so that you'd have some way to move it forward if you want to try.
Very good. Thank you.
Very good. Great meeting, and thank you everybody for your brains as usual. I hope everybody stays safe, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. We already have topics for the next meeting. Thank you for joining.
All right.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Right. Bye.